Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and sharing another good bit of good news about climate change. It's a very interesting article I just found on Carbonbrief. Carbonbrief are rather good, but a bit technical. They're nearly always very accurate. They're high level of accuracy, and but sometimes a bit technical, and it can be a bit difficult to understand what they mean. So anyway, I'm just introducing this article here, and so this is a guest post, and then this is the actual article itself. There we are. See, it's long, complicated technical paper, and then this is the guest post, which is much easier to read, but still a little bit techy for some people. So here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about that, which hopefully give you a little bit of an into it, and just tell you what they found. So this is about carbon capture. So first of all, some of you won't necessarily have this background, and so just bear with me if I just explain for you, those of you who already know it. But anyway, hopefully it's a good refresher. So this is our actual CO2 emissions, and as you can see, it's done by just adding all the piles up, like they often do for these charts. For instance, that's the United States, and that's Europe. So it's actually just that bit which is our emissions from Europe, and that bit is the United States, and that bit is the EU. That's European other, and that's the EU. So as you can see, the EU emissions are reducing, and it's all the way down. So when people say that the emissions are still increasing, the yearly emissions are still increasing, as you can see, all the way, if you include half of the emissions, all the way up to, I think even as far as including Africa, then it's actually decreasing slightly, right up to there. See, that's 1.16. No, it's increasing at that. Yeah, so. Oh yes, no, I was looking at the wrong figure. Yes, if you look at it up to, it doesn't give the total up to Africa, sorry. But you can see if you add it all up from the figure. And then once you include India, China and Asia, then you start getting that it's increasing. So now the plan is that by 2020, then we have our new round of pledges. And then this should quickly reduce the emissions all the way down to 2050 if we were to have really steep pledges in 2020. And if we don't do that, then we reduce at least, hopefully reduce at least a fair bit. There's a chance that the EU may pledge to go all the way down to zero by 2050. The UK already has. Finland is far more ambitious, 2035. So if it's not ambitious enough in 2020, then you've got 2025, then you've got 2030, and so on. So most of you probably know that. So then, if I go back to this, and I just look at the figure, 35 gigatons. So now if I go back to this figure, then we don't actually need much carbon capture and storage if we can manage to do those steep pledges. We just need a little bit to offset some of the things that are very hard to do in a carbon zero way. For instance, maybe very big heavy tractors and probably a plane flight, although both of those can probably be done with biofuel if we have enough of it. So the 2018 report, then they assumed that we do steep reductions for the P1 path, the easy way, to stay within 1.5, and then we have forestry and land use change. But this paper is looking at, is vastly expanding on that, and then they have the BECCS as the only other thing that they really looked at. And BECCS, a bit of an acronym, means bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, which what it means is you have biofuels, you burn them, and then you capture the carbon dioxide and you store it for centuries. And so this assumes you're just using that for forestry waste and crop waste. This assumes that you're also using it on the less productive land. And it's still, it gets more controversial the more it's using it on productive land. You wouldn't use it in national parks or your tropical rainforest or so on. At least hopefully you don't. And so that this is best tuned quite low, but some of the others, then that's actually lower than they would have assumed, because this is sustainable all the way up to there. But if you're just doing the bio-waste, it's just down there. So anyway, but some of these other ones are really quite interesting. First of all, they have a possibility of quite a large improvement from soil use changes. And to explain this diagram, if it's this side, then it actually costs you money. So this will be paid for by carbon taxes. And this is already going on. But on this side, you are actually earning from it. So you're capturing carbon and at the same time earning money as you do so. And so this is soil improvement. And to give an example of that, of how that works, then here in the UK, then at the moment, farmers tend to just have a field that is, for instance, when I used to live near Oxford in England, then there would be some fields that are just ploughed all the time. And you just go out for a walk and there's always potatoes there or something like that. And then the other fields, there's one field I used to go for a walk and pass that field, which always, all the time I was in Oxford, had dairy cows. Apart from, maybe right at the beginning it didn't, but for year after year after year, it just had dairy cows. Always. And a vast slurry pond just outside the farm, very smelly, big pond full of slurry. Because that is like the manure, but very liquid from the cows, the dairy cows. And this is not the best way to do agriculture if you want to capture the carbon, because what you should do is to do crop rotation. And so the field that is now always potatoes, then every year or every few years it would be grassland, and then cows would go and graze the grassland, and then the grassland would be ploughed back into the ground, and then you'd grow your potatoes, and then you maybe grow a succession of different crops, and then you go back to the grassland. And that's what they used to do. But now they just put lots and lots of fertilizer in, and the soil gets very poor. It loses the carbon dioxide, it loses the carbon in it, and it gets lost as carbon dioxide, and you just have to put more and more fertilizer into it to keep the crops' yields going and keep them high. You still get high crop yields, but you're not storing carbon. Now, if you do crop rotation, which is a mix, the crop rotation is the old way without fertilizer. But suppose you do both. You do your fertilizer, but you also rotate the crops. Then you can still have the very high yields that you have with fertilizer. You're using less fertilizer, and you would get you get a high yield from your crops. And that's what that's what the Committee for Climate Change say that we should do in the UK. And that would take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And you're actually earning from that. It's actually your farm will actually earn you more money if you do this crop rotation. So that's the general thing. But it's basically education thing, it's an awful lot of it. And working out ways for that to be able to work. So that's the soil improvement. So if we had that all worldwide, as much soil improvement as possible, really taking care of the soils, being very intelligent about our soil, then we could take an awful lot of carbon out. Now, to explain how this works, whether it's below, then you're earning money, above, you're paying money. The width says how much, so that's getting on for 2 gigatons from soil improvement. Then this is a very interesting one. I'd just like to talk about this briefly. That's rather fun. That's the biochar. And this goes back to the ancient times. Just got a good picture there of it. This is the Amazon rainforest. And way back then, this is back at the time of the conquistadors, when they arrived in the South America, then they report seeing hundreds of kilometers along the rivers, they saw fields on the other side. And that, since then, in the centuries since then, has just been completely covered in trees. Now, as they have cut the trees down, then these ancient fields are showing, what used to be fields are showing, with these geoglyphs, as they're called. And then there's another one here somewhere. Another one. So geometric designs that were carved into the earth by the ancient, the civilization was still there a few centuries back. But they got all the illness, they got the flu and so on from the invading Europeans, and that civilization just vanished. And there's probably as much of a population then as there is now. For quite a large population and very fertile fields. So these fields, they use biochar. And this is something that we've actually learned from them, basically. Their ancient technology that we are looking at into actually recovering today. And so what this biochar is that you actually basically make charcoal. And the way you make charcoal from wood, if it's wood charcoal, and the old charcoal burners used to do this, is that you would burn the wood in very low oxygen levels. And this then means it turns into charcoal. And so if you do that, then you bury that charcoal into the soil, plough it into the soil. Then you enrich the soil and you take a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. And you get a 10% increase in yields. And if you keep on doing that year after year, then you can capture an awful lot of carbon from the atmosphere as biochar, at the same time as you improve the soils. So it's just basically copying what they did. Now, we're just gradually learning how to do this properly. And it's, as they say in their paper here, and the summary of the paper, that you look at that, biochar, we estimate, but it is very hard to make a consistent product or predict soil reactions, but it has potential to increase crop yields by 10%. So if we do a lot of that, then that is a potential for up to, what was their number? It could be up to a gigaton of CO2 from that. And it would, and then minus 65. So if you're reading this page, when it says minus 90, minus 20, so that is soil carbon sequestration. That was what I was talking about before, like crop rotation. Then minus 90 means you actually are earning $90 per ton of CO2. The opposite of a carbon tax. And then here, if you had a carbon tax as well, if you had carbon trading as well, you'd have that price on top of that. And biochar as well. You'd be earning $65 per ton, plus whatever extra you might be earning if there's some kind of premium on taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that'd be quite a good earner. And then there's forestry. Then forestry is relatively straightforward. The reason that's carbon capture, and so the carbon capture period, say it says centuries, decades, that's decades, but that's making into stuff that goes into houses, some of that. And wood that goes into houses could still be there centuries later. And then centuries or more is the actual, like aggregates. And then this is cement curing, and that's actually already, that can actually be an earner. You take the carbon dioxide and use that to strengthen the cement. So the thing to look at here is the vast, compare that with what we looked at before, the CO2 levels, that's 35 gigatons. And if you also take a look at the remaining carbon budget, and there's an analysis, where's the remaining carbon budget? Yes, here we go. So before, they used to think it was only 20 gigatons remaining from the beginning of 2018, about 3 years of emissions. But they recalculated it, and they found out that the earlier reports had underestimated the amount left. And we now say it's about 420 gigatons for a 66% chance, and 580 gigatons for 50-50 chance of staying within 1.5 C. So, so if we go and look there, then this is a potential for, if you include all of that, it's up to 10 gigatons a year. These are yearly reductions, yearly storage. And I looked at just the ones that are earning money, and just the main ones of those, and the ones that are actually storing for decades or centuries. And I work out from those three that you have a total of 4.4 gigatons a year, $296 billion a year. Now, take that 4.4 and multiply that by the remaining years in this century. I haven't actually done this calculation yet. Then we have 352 gigatons, and our remaining budget is 420. So that's nearly we could actually offset. Suppose we used all that budget, which is the easiest way of staying within 1.5 C, and we got to 1.5 C. And at 2050, then from then on, we should make that 50 years times 4.4, which is an easy one, 220. So we could be then halfway back to zero emission, to our current levels, just by using those three things. If we use them optimally, biochar, soil improvement and forestry, could get us halfway back to our current CO2 emissions from the 2050 1.5 C level back to 1.25. And then if we did more of this stuff, then as well as that, those are the three main ones there. That's not included. That's all that biochar and forestry, potentially. And then if we have a little bit of this as well, then that's significantly make a big difference as well in the cement curing. So I haven't included the cement curing, which would be another gigaton or so. And then there are quite a few things that they've actually left out of there. So this is kind of like very promising, especially if you look forward beyond 2050, that we can actually be going down quite a way. And this is actually offsetting. We don't need it if we get steep reductions, but if we have somewhat slower reductions, then this could help offset it more. As we get more towards 2050, then we can actually do more of this, as well as more of the steeper reductions. And so I'm not saying that we should just that there's no way that we can do it just by this without steep reductions in CO2. So it's not saying we can do this instead of the pledges, but it can help us. And there's quite a lot of actually potential there, a bit more potential than they thought than they considered in the 2018 report. And there's several other things that they looked at there. So they also looked at the enhanced weathering. So this is a very new thing, crushing rocks and then spreading them on the land. And that is a new thing, but they don't include that because it's too early to know either what the benefits would be in terms of enhanced yields or the actual amount that we would be able to get from that. And then these things up here, then they're all single asterisks. This is actually microalgae, methanol. This is actually using renewables plus carbon dioxide and water. This is microalgae. And these all have the potential, with technology improvements, to be going way down here. But these only sequester the carbon for days to hours, days to months, because it makes it into biofuel, which is then burnt. Unless that fuel is burnt, of course, in a biofuel captures in BCCS, in which case I suppose we count it down here. But this is the idea of making like fuel for airplanes and cars and things using renewables, and that's basically carbon zero area, and that can actually be reduced down with technology improvements, but at the moment it's quite expensive. So those are the main things there. And then so I just wanted to mention that actually we have, I've already talked about this before, but we also have the possibility of seaweeds, and those have actually vast potential, and I'll just link to that in the video description. According to one paper, so seaweeds are traditional to South Korea and China, and they actually reverse acidification in the oceans. They take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they also they can have actually got quite a vast potential for, especially combined with, they could be the bioenergy carbon capture and storage. If it was from seaweed, then it's not taking up anything from the land. If it's floating in the middle of the Pacific and then you burn it and then you capture the carbon dioxide. So that could be quite a large area for the BACCS. That could go way. And that, I mean, I think that is actually just more than all of this put together. If you were to use even a few percent of the Pacific Ocean for seaweed farming, vast area. And so potentially, and this is very low tech, and just growing seaweed on strings basically. But I mean, it's not, there's high tech stuff as well, but the actual infrastructure, most of the infrastructure is low tech. Lots of strings is the main thing that it is based on. So the vast amount of the infrastructure is low tech and not very expensive. So this is a possibility. It's very early days yet. So we need to, anyway, with the seaweed, then we could go down even to pre-industrial if it really rolled out, and not likely to be able to roll this out in the near future. But as we work on it, so in the second half of the century or something, then we might well be looking at this. And we certainly are having seaweed farms growing. More and more of that is actually going on, and they don't cover that. They don't try to cover everything. And then another thing I saw recently was the agave, which I hope I've got the right word. Agave or something. No, I have to get the right word. Anyway, it's a kind of it's a plant that you can grow in semi-arid regions, and you can intercrop it with trees, and it has a very large carbon potential over semi-arid regions, which covers a large area of the world. And this would be quite a big chunk here as well every year. And if that was rolled out, the idea is to ferment it, to crush it. I think they ferment it or something, and they make it into silage, and then they feed it to goats and such like. And so don't think that they've got everything here, but they have quite a lot of the more important ones. And it's a really interesting paper, so I add that to the video description, and then also add the seaweed. And if you know of anything else, do say in a comment. I'll add that to the description as well. If you know of any other carbon capture, interesting ideas, especially ones where you actually earn money from it, because those are ones that you can really see happening if they earn money from it. And then this will happen if we've got carbon taxes, which we already have for carbon pricing. I mean, not carbon taxes. Sorry, I used the wrong word. Carbon pricing, where you actually can earn money from storing carbon. Whereas carbon taxes would be that if you emit carbon, then carbon dioxide, then you're taxed for it. So the carbon taxing is actually, some people do it, but it's not a requirement of the Paris Agreement that you have that. And there are many other ways. We're not using it in the UK. And we're not using carbon pricing either. But not yet anyway. But we are going to be using this, and we are going to be using this. Anyway, so that's that. And oh yes, and so every half degree matters, and this is like a quarter of a degree in half a century, so it's quite a lot. Remember, we just worked that out. Half a century of this is quarter of a degree reduction. If it was all the way up to that 4.4, that was just that little bit. Oh, I didn't talk about the enhanced oil recovery. Just very briefly about enhanced oil recovery. That is the idea of pumping carbon dioxide into oil reservoirs. We're going to still need oil for as long until we haven't done for as long as we haven't yet done the transition. So rather than make new oil wells, then pump carbon dioxide into the old ones, and then the ways of doing it which keep the oil captured, the carbon dioxide captured, and just the oil comes up. And then once you've got all the pipes in place, you can later on use that for your biofuel energy carbon capture and storage. You can use the same infrastructure as for the EOR to pump it down into the oil disused oil wells. So that's quite a nice one. But we're probably going to have less of that as we go down to the lowest carbon emissions. So that's it. If I've made any mistakes, then please say in the comments, and I get little info things. They're actually technically polls. They look a little bit strange, but you can get a little eye up in the top corner there somewhere, and click on it. Then that's if I've made a mistake and I corrected it. And so anyway, hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you some positive things to think about, especially right now, because we're getting some of these news about the next climate change conference, and sort of saying, are they going to make big pledges? We don't expect to get the big pledges yet. That's in 2020, and a lot of people are worried a bit about, China hasn't said anything, but China is very preoccupied with this trade war, and I don't really expect them to say much until maybe a bit closer to 2020. So people keep trying to push them to say something, but they're so caught up with the trade war at the moment, and hopefully we can get over that. They definitely got an awful lot of incentive, and they've been leaders in some ways with the and not in terms of CO2 emissions, they're still increasing, but the vast, very quick increase of renewables, and they supply renewables to most of Asia now at very low prices. So they're already doing something very positive there for climate change. So anyway, that's for another talk maybe.